handled the Turing papers.
Thank you, Sue. I hope you can all hear me. I think this might fall off like Peter did, but anyway, we'll try and carry on. Yes, thank you very much indeed, Sue, and also the BCS for inviting me here this evening. I'm not a computer specialist at all. I'm not even really particularly an historian of computing, but I have been involved with the Turing papers, as they've come to be known, for a number of years. And I do find Turing absolutely fascinating, and as we've just heard from Peter, he laid the seeds and the foundation for basically, I think, our modern way of life. I think there's everybody in this room with a mobile telephone, for example. Everybody uses the encryption on a daily basis, and I would have, I think he may well have been surprised at his impact. He may not have fulfilled his predictions in AI and other things, but I certainly think that he is a major person in the foundation of our modern society. So when we're looking at Turing's legacy and Turing's legacy through his artifacts, because I'm a books and manuscript specialist, I'm really interested in those kinds of objects in particular. The way in which I'm going to approach this, and this is how I approach everything when I deal with books at Christie's, is I've sort of become an archaeologist or a classical scholar. You know, if one was to look at Turing from that perspective, what would you find in the strata of your excavations, peeling back the layers of history? What extant texts would you find as a classical scholar? How would you reconstruct that? And the thing about Turing is that there's actually not much of it about. It is very rare. That isn't to say there isn't some material about. I'm sure many of you here have looked at the King's College Cambridge Turing archive, which they have a fantastic online version of it, but I do recommend that you also go and make an appointment and see some of the physical objects there. They have wonderful notebooks, manuscript letters, and of course these printed publications too. And of course there are various secret documents which have only become recently available to us. By recent, I mean it wasn't until 1996 that the existence of what's called the Prof's book, which is Turing's work on the Enigma, was actually revealed. This was kind of accidental because the US decided that they had a copy of this and it wasn't necessary to keep it under wraps anymore, and revealed it, thus forcing the National Archives' hand here to reveal that they had a copy of it too. So there's that, and there's also, of course, his publications in periodicals, and many of those have been published again in collected works. But, you know, I'm someone who, I'm a book hunter. I'm I'm this kind of kid who thought Indiana Jones was a documentary. I like the idea of getting my hands on the relics, and at Christie's I'm very lucky and privileged to be able to do that. So I said there wasn't much of it left. I've described, some of the archives about. So it was absolutely fantastic that in November 2010 I was able to bring this to auction, and this is a part shot of some of the what have been called the Turing papers. I think the word papers is a bit of a misnomer actually, and I'll come on to that in a bit later. This is a part shot. It consists of 16 off-prints plus some other assorted material, including Max and Lynn Newman's Visitors Book. Of which we can see here, and you can make out there's some signatures of Alan Turing down here. This is from 1947 to 48, when Turing was visiting the Newmans at Manchester, and he was working actually at the MPL on the rival project at Ellington. The arrival of this on the commercial market generated huge excitement, and I must confess that it is a highlight of my career that the question about this material was asked at Prime Minister's Questions by the newly elected MP for Milton Keynes South, Ian Stewart, who asked David Cameron what he was going to do to save the Turing papers for the nation. But the problem with the word papers, as I've already discussed, or mentioned in passing, is that they're open to all sorts of misinterpretation. And here is a classic example of misinterpretation of what these objects, what the artifact legacy of Turing is. This came from, I don't know if anybody went to the Google Garden Party at Bletchley Park last year, but you would have got a free copy of the Daily Telegraph with this article written by Sinclair McKay. And it sums up what people think papers mean. They think they're secret, they think they're sort of manuscript or typescript or somehow proof working notebooks, and they must include cryptanalysis. I'm afraid none of that is true or relevant in this context, and we have here, codebreaker secret papers. This is, I'm afraid, misinformation. In one sense, what the Max Newman collection of off-prints represents is something much more exciting, and that is, it represents the foundation of modern computer science. As Peter has just pointed out, that is one of his major legacies. And I think another, perhaps even more important legacy, oddly enough, is his solving of the Entscheidungsproblem. Because in the 1930s, it was thought that Hilbert's last remaining unsolved question was the last thing to be discovered in mathematics, and here we have a chap who actually did it. Yes, he got beaten, but to it, which actually has an impact on what I'm going to say a bit later. But it's still very, I think, impressive founding documents that we have. You would have heard me use the word off-print. This is a really peculiar word, and I must confess and apologise in advance that, of course, when you work in the books world, you tend to use very distinctive bibliographic terminology and jargon. I've just put up here, you can read it on the screen, what an off-print is. But I think it would be worthwhile just to tell you that off-prints, which are these separate publications or articles that appeared in larger publications, actually have a very long and distinguished history. They were probably started in about the 16th century, and up until very recently were used as a major form of communication between learned men and men of science in what might be loosely termed the Republic of Letters. This idea that men of science could correspond freely without undue hindrance, without political affiliation, so it doesn't matter if the English and the French are at war, we can still communicate with men of learning in Paris and in London and vice versa. And as a result of this, they actually evolved to be a very effective communication tool for spreading the word of what your latest ideas were and showing other scientists what you have published. And of course, I suppose in the 19th century it reaches its peak of popularity. Darwin, for example, was always sending his off-prints to all sorts of German scientists, etc. Joseph Hooker at Kew was sending his botanical papers to Asa Gray in America, and so on and so forth. So what you should see the off-prints as is a form of a web of communication, as a way of keeping men of science alert to what the latest thinking is.
Can I just ask a question? Because I'm familiar with these like that. But some of them were just sort of the sheets that appeared in the journal, and some seem to have got a separate cover on them. You don't do differentiate between those?
No, let me come to the next slide.
Yeah.
So, here we go. To answer the question, if you have sheets of paper that are identical to what appears in a larger periodical, then generally speaking, and it's not enclosed in a separate cover, and you can bibliographically detect using pagination and signatures that it is identical and perhaps paper watermarks, then my guess is you are talking about an extract and not an off-print. And an extract would be where somebody had razor-bladed the article out. But it is a fair and difficult question. What is the difference? Off-prints, and I will come on to uncomputable numbers as a very good example of this. Off-prints are printed either very early or as part of the print run of the publication. And I don't want to dwell on the bibliographic niceties of these things because it's boring. But basically, there may be, for instance, textual variants because some of them papers may have been changed between printing and final publication. In the case of Turing's off-prints versus his periodical publications, I have looked at every single one, and there is no textual variance between any of them. But there is often quite a lot of pagination differences, and there's often a lot of evidence that the type has been reset. In the case of uncomputable numbers, uncomputable numbers was actually published in two separate parts of the Proceedings of the London Mathematical Society. So one part came out in November 1936, and the remaining, it cuts off right in the middle of the paper, and then the remaining 25 pages start in the middle in the December issue. In the off-print, which you can see the sheets are different. It's gathered in a different way, and it's sewn in a different way, or stapled in a different way. And they're different, it's different paper. It has the same pagination, but the type has been reset. And what you can say about uncomputable numbers, the off-print, what you can distinctly say is it's the first complete publication of that important paper because it's in one package. It actually arrives later and is distributed later than the periodical parts because of Hodgson's, the printers, made a mistake and didn't send the off-prints to Sarah Turing, his mother. They sent them to Princeton by mistake, so it took over a month for them to receive them, and he didn't distribute them until February 37. So technically, the periodical parts precede the off-print, but the off-print is the very first separate publication of uncomputable numbers. Sorry, I've got slightly sidetracked there. This is the, you want to see the physical object. This is the Holy Relics. This is the Indiana Jones moment where you hold up the great stuff. And it doesn't look like it. But this, what you're looking at here is the drab front wrapper of the foundation document of modern electronic digital computing. It's pretty worn, the wrappers are actually off. But inside, you can see we've got red Chinagraph pencil here, PTA down the bottom, some crossing out of the footnotes. These are annotations made by Max Newman. Why am I so excited about this? Well, it's the romance. I got told off at the history and the conference of the history and philosophy of computing in October last year when I called it romance. He said, no, you should call it historical sensation. I said, hey, you can't get more romantic than this. This is the chap who, responding to Max Newman's question, is there a mechanical process by which the Entscheidungsproblem can be solved, goes away, and according to a story he tells Robin Gandy, lies down in the middle of Grantchester Meadows and has a sort of Isaac Newtonian myth story about it, this tape machine coming to him. Doesn't talk to anybody about it, perhaps with the exception of his fellow King's Scholar Braithwaite, who incidentally complains he hasn't got his offering. He got delayed from Princeton. But this is the relic of the tutee responding to his mentor in a quite brilliant and unique vision of what, or it's a practical application of how a machine might be applied to a pure mathematics problem. I don't think anybody else would have come up with that if Turing had not started from first principles, which Peter always says was his problem. You wouldn't have had that genius insight because he didn't read any of the other literature on it. So
He's quoting Church in that thing, the first one paragraph.
but don't forget what happened is that Newman didn't read this until May 36, by which time an off-print, incidentally, had arrived from Church at King's, and Newman realised that Turing had preempted, but he thought this was such startling brilliance. He was going to get it published anyway, and of course the only person that could referee with this was Church himself. And on the back of this, he gets the Proctor Fellowship. Does he get the Proctor Fellowship, Peter? I think so. He gets the fellowship to go to Princeton and work with Church. So what you're looking at here is the mentor's annotations and notes. I won't put everything up. There's lots of pencil annotation and stuff. It's, I think, very interesting. You're seeing the interaction between Turing and Newman, and I think this is incredibly important.
Judy, we've got about 4 minutes.
Okay. So why was this collection formed? When Turing dies, Turing doesn't actually have very many close friends or acquaintances, or indeed supporters. And Max Newman is loyal throughout the whole of his life. And there's a particular relationship with Lynn Newman as well, Max's wife. And they got to know the Turing family quite well. And Sarah Turing, Alan's mother, in fact, comes to stay with them in Manchester only a few days after the suicide. And that's why the visitor's book is quite a poignant part of this collection, because it shows her arriving and so on and so forth. Newman actually didn't have a complete set of Turing's offprints, but every fellow of the Royal Society is entitled to an obituary, and Newman was asked to write it, and at the end of every obituary you are allowed to, well, you put in a bibliography, and so he wanted a complete set of papers, offprints, to be able to write that. And so he asked Sarah Turing for some to plug its gaps. So I've got a better slide here. So there's Sarah Turing's signature on the side. So we have a group here with great provenance. And it also explains why you have his mother's inscription. Selling books these days is just like, there's a phrase, you know, location, location, location is the 3 things that sell a house. Well, provenance, provenance, and provenance are now the things that really sell books. And I'll just quickly go on to talk about Turing in comparison with other great 20th century scientists. I'll be very quick, but I think this is probably the most interesting slide. I'm sorry, I'm hopeless at Excel. Maybe I should have done those ICT classes. So it's not very clear, but I'll talk you through it. Turing material in the commercial marketplace is very rare. As I've said at the very beginning, there are a few archives, and of course we can read his material printed in the collected works and in the periodicals. But if you want to have an artifact, the physical legacy of his production, and if you want to be able to say, well, this is the great man had this and he presented it to other great men such as Newman, or indeed familial members like his mother, you will be sorely disappointed in the auction records going back to 1975, no Turing offprint and no Turing manuscript, not a single letter has ever sold at auction. And I've traced booksellers' catalogues, can't find any of it. Let's have a look how that compares with Einstein's offprints on relativity, Crick and Watson on the structure of DNA, and Fleming on penicillin. What we see here is that you've had 4 chances since I chose 1994 for a cut-off date, for reasons I won't go into now, but since 1994 you've had 4 chances to buy Crick and Watson's paper, the offprint. This is always found signed, so it always tends to have great provenance, and you know, you would probably spend around between $20,000 and $30,000 to buy that. In 2008, you see there's, well, it's not very clear, but there's a huge spike where one of them sells for $70,000 because it's inscribed by Wilkins. Fleming, he's jolly rare. I mean, he's really rare. 4 opportunities to buy the offprint. Generally, it will be paid between $1,500 and $3,500. But in 01, you'll see this big spike here. This is because it was part of a major important science collection that was sold at Sotheby's, and everybody wanted part of the action. So $110,000 for that. Einstein, everybody knew he changed the world when he published, and they reprinted his stuff really quickly. And it's actually really easy to get hold of Einstein, though it's very difficult to work out exactly which is the true first offprint and all that kind of stuff. But basically, you've had 11 opportunities to buy Einstein since 1994, of which you're basically paying between $1,500 and $5,000 US. You will see that there's this huge spike here, $70,000 for Wolfgang Pauli's annotated copy of the offprint, and there's another one for $12,000, which is a presentation copy. And what that shows you is that provenance is key. And the thing about when we decided to put an estimate of £300,000 to £500,000 on the Turing Newman offprints, why that was so much is because the periodical issue only, the box standard one that you can find, you've had 13 opportunities to buy that at auction since '94, and you'd be basically paying anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 for it. And that's just a periodical. So any librarians here from mathematical collections, lock up your proceedings upon the Mathematical Society, because that's the boring periodical is worth a lot of money. And it gets even more crazy here. You've got this huge spike here. That was at the Richard Green sale at Christie's, New York, 2008, $150,000 for that, and it doesn't have any provenance. So the point that I was trying to make is that in a commercial reality is that provenance, provenance, and provenance are the 3 things that sell. And in the Max Newman collection of Alan Turing's offprints, we have a wonderful legacy with these physical artifacts, and that is why they're so valuable. I am just so glad that we were able to sell them to Bletchley Park through Sue. The really interesting thing is, if you think the final deal was £310,000, if you think that's a lot of money, this week £750,000, that's £750,000 was spent on Captain Scott's photographs that were rescued from the Scott expedition. Now I know it's the centenary, that strikes me as a hell of a lot of money for some nice art. But here you've got the foundation of modern computer science with great provenance for not very much money. Thank you very much.